Good. So applied linguistics. So as I'm telling you, I'm going now to focus on the syllabus we are going to follow in my course with you. Okay, and hopefully we'll try to cover as much as possible within the time left for you until most probably the end of December. Okay, so applied linguistics syllabus. So the first, there are 8 units. Okay, there are 8 units in this course. And as I told you, the booklet that you can have in the photocopy center, you can just take it. It contains all the details that we are we're going to talk about in the course. Okay, so it summarizes everything. So there are 8 units, as I'm telling you. Okay, so the first unit that we are going to start with today, okay, it talks about what is applied linguistics. Okay, what is applied linguistics? In fact, I have already started talking to you about that as an introduction. So we'll try to see what it means in more detail. Okay, what is applied linguistics? And in this unit, we're going to cover the definition, try to come up with a definition, different definitions of applied linguistics. Okay, and also we will try to go through historical development of discipline, how it came into being, existence, and how it developed in the different schools, British, American, European, and development of each one. Okay, history of applied linguistics, and then next thing we're going to cover is some subfields of applied linguistics, the disciplines that are related, attached to psycholinguistics, and I've already told you that there is psycholinguistics, there is sociolinguistics, etc., etc., many other disciplines. And then in the next, we will focus on the interdisciplinary nature of applied linguistics. Because applied linguistics, as you can see from my little explanation, it is interdisciplinary. There are many disciplines that come into it. For example, if you take sociolinguistics, as I told you, yeah, you have language and then you have society, sociology or society, as you wish. Okay, so then you have psychology and linguistics, psycholinguistics. Pragmatics, you have intentions, etc. Context, functions, and then you have the language. Okay, so it is a kind of interdisciplinary nature of applied linguistics. So now, for example, the most recent discipline that has appeared recently is called Forsenic linguistics. It is related to the relationship between language and law. How language is used in the field of law. Okay, court and the laws and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the new discipline. Another discipline that somebody has mentioned is called computational linguistics or computer-aided language teaching, whatever. So there we have again the interrelationship between language, especially language teaching or language analysis, also, and technology. Okay, so it is a kind of interdisciplinary kind of branch of linguistics. And then, so this is the first unit that we're going to cover today. So the next unit we're going to see, it talks of, it is called, it's also related to language, okay, and in which we're going to cover language learning theories. We're going to cover the language learning theories. I'm sure you have already seen some of them in educational psychology course. And these learning theories are as follows. There's the behaviorist theory. There is the innatist or mentalist theory, monitor theory, the acquisition learning hypothesis, because you know in language learning there are theories, there is we will see the details. And then the natural order hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, okay, the affective filter hypothesis, and socio-cultural theory of language learning, the acculturation model, the intergroup model. So we will cover these, okay, in the second unit. The third unit we will focus on the native speaker. And in this regard we will try to define who is a native speaker, what is a native speaker, and who is somebody who is like native-like speaker. What's the difference between the two? And then we'll talk about childhood acquisition, intuitions about idiolect and grammar, because in this regard, when talking about native speaker, we need to refer to those concepts like universal grammar, etc. Intuitions about standard language grammar, discourse and pragmatic control. One of the disciplines I forgot to mention for you that is also related to applied linguistics is called discourse analysis. It's also part of, you don't have it as an independent subject, but we will try to refer to it from time to time, discourse analysis. You know Holiday? Holiday? Somebody heard about Holiday? Mac Holiday? Functional linguistics, functional grammar? Anyway, so that's discourse, that's one of the schools there. Okay, so you have creative performance, you know the distinction between language and performance, okay, langue parole, interpreting and translating, okay, and losing a native speaker identity, okay. This is the third unit. The fourth unit, we will focus on the distinction between first and second language acquisition. First and second language acquisition. In this regard, we are going to talk about factors responsible for the rapidity and accuracy of the acquisition of a language. Acquisition of a language, there are factors that either can improve or either can hinder. So we'll talk about those factors. Characteristics of L1, first language acquisition, and second language acquisition. Okay, characteristics of each one of the two. The most common one, the most clear, or the clearest one, is that of age. Because when we talk about first language acquisition, we talk about babies, and then the child, and then go. With second language acquisition, we usually talk about older than a baby, okay? Somebody, for example, like if you travel or if you go abroad, and you live, for example, in, I don't know, in Germany or whatever, you learn German, okay? So that's what usually happens to immigrants, okay? Or in our context, there are some Moroccans who start learning. For example, if you go to the souk, the market, souk al-had, you have those people who are selling. So they have learned French because they were in the business and interacting with French people. So they learned French or German, and they are quite good at it. And those people learned or acquired that second language when they were older. So the age is the most common, the clearest the difference between the two. Similarities and differences between L1 and L2. We will focus more on differences and similarities between the two. This is Unit 4, first and second language acquisition. The distinction between the two, the similarities between the two. And as I told you in the beginning, we need to go, this is the most logical way to go in the field of applied linguistics. Okay? Field of applied linguistics, you need to focus, because one of the main things about, as we're going to see about applied linguistics, is that focus on language teaching. This is one of the main focuses of applied linguistics. And before you focus on language teaching, you need to know on what it is based. Yes, you need to know first the language learning theories, first language acquisition, second language, everything related to this. And only then you can be able to understand better those language teaching theories. So the last chapters we're going to see is about applied linguistics and language teaching. Now, Unit 5, we will move on to a little bit on some sociolinguistics and society. Social influences on language learning. Language learning can be affected by some social factors. Okay? So in this regard, we are going to talk about the following. The act of language learning. Second language learning, the learner. Input and output. The language learner. Social context. Gender and power, age, audience, identity, social network relations. All these, as you can see, they are social factors, and these social factors can have some impact on language learning, right? I'm not going to the details, but just to tell you the order of the units that we're going to cover. Unit 6 is individual differences in language learning. Individual differences. As you know, in language learning, there are some differences between those who learn that language, be they children or grown-ups or adults. For children, for example, it is known that learners have different learning styles. Okay, learning styles. There are some who learn by focusing more on music. There are others who focus more on drawing, on listening, on visuals, etc. So those are individual learning differences, styles between the learners. So we need to know those learners. One of the presentations I have already done for some teachers who teach English in private sector, it talks about multiple intelligences theory. Okay, and in this one it is related to language learning. You can find it on my blog. I have a little blog that I will tell you. You can go and you will find that presentation, and you know about multiple intelligence. There are some children who learn better by music, others who learn better by visuals, others who learn better by by naturalistic. They are naturalistic intelligence, etc., etc. Yes, and so there are details there. So if you want to learn more about it, you go to that blog. Now, in this, we're going to cover the same learning styles. We're going to see those learning styles. What are they? How they function? How they work? And then we will talk about things that are also related to motivation, which you have in your educational psychology. Motivation differs from one to another. And motivation impacts language learning. Okay? So, motivation, anxiety. Anxiety. If that's why in the language learning, or not language, no, language teaching theories, they always advise teachers to create what they call some kind of stress-free environment. Some kind of stress-free environment for doing their teaching, for their courses, for their classes. Why? Because when there is a lot of stress in a class, do you think that there's going to be a lot of learning? No. Okay, it doesn't work. So what needs to be done is some kind of stress-free environment, reducing anxiety as much as possible in order to make people at ease, and then learning can be better. So we will talk about that, anxiety, personality, willingness to communicate. So you can know that people are different in this regard. There are some people who are they like talking, some others who don't like talking, they just listen. That has to do with personality and learning style. Okay? These are learning styles of different people. Okay? And if you focus more on somebody who prefers to be silent and you try to impose on him to speak, maybe you're going not to help him or her, you are going to hinder his or her learning process. So you need to know these differences. So these are the things we are going to cover in this unit, which is called individual differences in language learning. And as I told you, much of what you have heard so far is covered somehow in your educational psychology course, because that's part of educational psychology. Next, we're going to have psycholinguistics and language learning. Okay, so there are, we will talk again, we'll come back to the issue of language acquisition and try to differentiate between language acquisition and language learning. As you know, language acquisition is different from language learning. Language learning, it means that there is learning in a formal context, okay, in a school or class. But language acquisition usually takes place in an informal context. So we'll try to go into that area and try to differentiate see the differences between the two. Arguments for and against language acquisition and learning. People still disagree. Some people say it's the same, others say no, it's not. So we'll see those arguments for and against language acquisition and language learning. The critical period notion, I'm sure you have heard about that critical period. You have heard about some girl in the field of psycholinguistics, they will always refer to it when talking about this, who was imprisoned by her family for some time and then grew up without listening, without developing language. And then it became difficult for that girl, to speak, even if they try to help her. Why? And that's one of the reasons that they use for arguing for this critical period notion. They say that the critical period has been gone away from it, so now the language acquisition device doesn't work appropriately, right? So that's what very little things we are going to cover there. And finally, applied linguistics and language teaching. Now we can move into applied linguistics and language teaching. And in this regard, we are going to focus on the teaching theories and approaches. We will talk about, first of all, the origins of language teaching methods, how they began, how language teaching methods and approaches, how it began, how it developed. And then we will talk about those methods and approaches in terms of historical order. We'll start with the grammar translation method, Goins method series, direct method, audiolingual method, silent way, gestopedia, communicative approach or communicative language teaching. And this is the most recent one. Methodology and curriculum in language teaching. So these are the units that we hopefully try to cover. Some units here are shorter than others. It might be very probable that we are going to cover sometimes 2 units in one class, one session, because as you can see from the headlines I was mentioning with regard to each unit, some units have more headlines and other have fewer headlines. Now this is the syllabus as we are going to follow it, and then you can refer to the